The cafeteria of Westbrook University always smelled like roasted espresso and expensive perfume. 2 cents that had no business belonging to someone like Ava Johnson. Everywhere she looked, there were designer jackets, laptop bags with gold monograms gleaming iPhones, and manicured fingers wrapped around cappuccinos that cost nearly as much as her weekly groceries. The chatter was loud, entitled careless. Everything in that place reminded her she did not belong. Yet she refused to shrink. She walked in quietly, her worn backpack slung over one shoulder, her step steady, her expression unreadable. She had survived more humiliations than this cafeteria could ever throw at her. And still, even the smallest things could sting. She reached the last free table in the corner and set down her $1 sandwich, the bread slightly squashed from being carried too long in her bag. It wasn't much, just peanut butter and a thin spread of jam, but it was food she could afford without guilt. She unwrapped it with careful fingers, her movements calm, almost practiced, as though she had learned long ago to eat small things slowly to make them last longer. Behind her, the whispers started, not even in hushed tones, but casual, as if she weren't a real human being sitting right there. "Is that?" Her lunch, a girl in a fur-trimmed coat, muttered. "Looks like something you'd give a toddler." Another laughed. "Or a janitor," someone added, and a ripple of giggles followed. Ava froze for half a heartbeat, not because she cared what they thought, but because she hated that they thought they had the right to say it. She forced her shoulders to relax and kept chewing. If she lifted her head, if she met their eyes, if she gave them any reaction at all, they would win. And Ava had learned in the hardest way possible that silence was sometimes the only armor the poor had left. Not pride, because pride was a luxury. Just silence. She bit into the sandwich and pretended it tasted better than it did. Pretended she didn't hear the mockery. Pretended she wasn't tired of pretending. But the next morning, everything changed. It started with the unmistakable hum of a high-end engine. People turned their heads as a long-stretched limousine, sleek, immaculate white, like a polished bone, rolled through the university gates. The sunlight caught on its glossy surface, blinding and hypnotic. Conversations died mid-sentence. A few students reached for their phones. The limousine glided to a stop in front of the main building, like something out of a celebrity premiere. Then the door opened. A spill of warm morning light flooded the pavement, gilding everything it touched, including the figure climbing out of the back seat. Ava stepped down carefully, one hand gripping the door frame for balance. She wore jeans and a simple black top. Her curly hair pulled into a high ponytail that accentuated the curve of her neck and the striking angles of her face. She did not look like she belonged to a limousine, but she carried herself with such quiet composure that for a moment, everyone wondered how they had never noticed her before. There was something magnetic about her stillness, something disarming about the way she tried so obviously to appear unfazed. Only she knew the truth. Her fingers were trembling slightly. She had never been inside a limousine in her life. She had barely even stood close to one. And yet, she forced her breath to slow, forced her expression to stay neutral, as though riding in luxury cars was simply another Tuesday morning for her. She stepped fully onto the pavement, the breeze lifting the stray curls around her face, the sunlight warming the deep brown of her skin. People stared, not with cruelty this time, but with confusion, curiosity, envy, admiration, all tangled together. The girl, who ate dollar store sandwiches, stepping out of a limousine. It didn't make sense, and that made it impossible to ignore. Ava felt all the eyes on her needles pricking her skin, but she held her head high. If there was one thing she had mastered, it was pretending she didn't notice the world staring, while her heart knocked painfully inside her chest. And then she felt it, an entirely different kind of gaze. The kind that didn't scrape over her like the others. The kind that felt heavier, sharper, Instinctively, she looked up. Liam Prescott stood across the courtyard, tall and immaculate, in a fitted charcoal coat, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a set of car keys. He was the kind of man whose presence filled a space even when he wasn't trying. Broad-shouldered, perfectly groomed, all icy confidence, wrapped in expensive fabric and old money indifference. The kind of man born into a life where the world always stepped aside for him. Yet now he was the one who had stopped. His stride paused mid-step. His brows faintly drew together. Then slowly, he lowered his sunglasses, something he absolutely never did, and looked directly at her. Really looked. As though Ava wasn't just another face in a crowd of thousands, but something that had yanked his attention against his will. The moment stretched unnervingly. Ava felt it in the back of her throat, in the sudden warmth rushing to her cheeks. She didn't like the way he stared at her, like he was trying to understand her, categorize her, unravel her. She didn't like the thought of anyone seeing past her careful quiet. Her pulse jumped, and she tore her gaze away, breaking the strange tether that had formed. She walked toward the entrance, without a glance back, trying to pretend that moment hadn't happened, that her stomach hadn't fluttered in a way she refused to acknowledge. But she didn't see the faint, bewildered crease between Liam's brows as he watched her go. Liam Prescott had been looked at his entire life, admired, feared, envied, desired. But he had not looked at someone like that in years, if ever. He didn't understand why the sight of an unfamiliar girl stepping out of a limousine had tugged something inside his chest like a loose thread being pulled. He didn't understand why he couldn't simply dismiss it and continue his day the way he always did, with perfect indifference. He especially didn't understand the strange flicker of irritation when she turned away without acknowledging him at all. But the one thing he did understand was this: that brief exchange, those 2 seconds of eye contact, had planted a quiet, unwelcome curiosity inside him. Whether he liked it or not, he would remember her face, the deep calm of her eyes, the way she held herself like someone used to fighting loneliness with dignity, the way she seemed to belong and not belong at the same time. Ava had no idea that while she spent her day trying to shake off embarrassment, wondering how long it would take for people to stop whispering about the limousine, someone else was thinking about her for reasons far more complicated. She had no idea that she had already become a question in Liam Prescott's mind, a puzzle piece that didn't fit anywhere but refused to be ignored. And she definitely didn't know that the limousine, the stairs, the tremor in her hands, none of those things would matter compared to the storm she had just stepped into. Because sometimes all it takes is one wrong moment, one unexpected look, one instant of curiosity to turn 2 strangers into something dangerously close to fate. She had simply stepped out of a car. He had simply looked at her. But sometimes the simplest things rewrite entire lives. And this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Liam Prescott had always believed that emotions were a kind of debt, dangerous, consuming, and best avoided. His father had drilled that into him with an iron tone and an expression carved out of ice. Prescotts do not bend. Prescotts do not feel. Prescotts endure. Liam grew up watching men in his family stride through boardrooms and charity galas with faces so immaculate they could have been sculpted, their smiles polished, their grief buried, their anger channeled into clean, profitable decisions. He had learned early that vulnerability was a language his household never spoke, and he had mastered silence, controlled gestures, controlled breathing, controlled everything. But the world was full of people who tried to chip at that surface. Girls with practiced flirty smiles, investors who thought a whiskey glass made them close friends, classmates who wanted proximity to the Prescott fortune more than they wanted him. Liam moved through them, like someone walking underwater, aware of everything, but untouched by all of it. He had refined his indifference into an art. He didn't let people in. He didn't even let himself in. He kept his heart locked away because he believed that if he ever opened that door, the weight behind it might crush him. And then there was Ava, a girl he had seen for barely a heartbeat, a girl who didn't try to win him or impress him or orbit him, a girl who stepped out of a limousine with tremor-hidden grace, then vanished into the building without looking back. He didn't know her story. He certainly didn't know her name, but he knew the feeling she left behind. A faint tug in his ribs, a quiet disruption, a note that didn't belong to his carefully composed song. It irritated him. It intrigued him more. All morning, Liam carried that tiny disturbance with him, a shadow that followed him into his finance lecture, into the library where he pretended to study, into the gym where he pushed harder than usual without understanding why. He found himself scanning crowds as he walked between classes, a habit he despised the moment he realized what he was doing, not because he feared being seen as distracted, but because it meant something in him had decided she mattered enough to look for. And he didn't give people that kind of power, ever. He tried to talk himself down from the absurd curiosity. Maybe she was someone's daughter visiting for the day. Maybe the limousine wasn't hers at all. Maybe she wasn't a student. Maybe she was simply nothing. But his mind refused to let it go. The image of her standing there quietly, as a storm of attention swirled around her, kept replaying the way her eyes held a kind of calm that was neither arrogance nor shyness, but something else entirely, something like defiance wrapped in dignity. It was the calm of someone used to surviving judgments, the calm of someone who refused to let the world take more from her than it already had. He recognized it because though his battles were different, he carried his own kind of defiance. His was colder, sharper, forged from wealth and pressure and expectations he never asked for. Hers was warmer somehow, more human, and he hated that difference because it made him feel the distance between them, and worse, the desire to bridge it. He didn't realize how lost in thought he was until his friend Daniel Hawthorne nudged his arm as they walked across campus. "You're spacing out. Since when do you stare into the distance like a poet? What's going on with you?" Liam blinked once, annoyed that someone noticed. "I'm not spacing out," he replied, crisp and clipped. "I'm thinking. Thinking about what you barely think about anything outside stocks deadlines and your protein intake." Daniel smirked. Liam shot him a look sharp enough to quiet him, but the smirk didn't disappear. Because Daniel knew Liam too well. Too many years of private schools, joint business competitions, summers spent navigating legacy expectations together. Daniel could read Liam's silences better than most. "Something's off," Daniel said under his breath as they headed toward the business building. "You look like a man who saw a ghost." "Maybe I did," Liam muttered. He wasn't trying to be poetic. He meant it. Ava had haunted him in a way he didn't understand. A passing stranger shouldn't be able to do that. A simple glance shouldn't matter. And yet here he was, calculating her face in the corner of his mind, like an unsolved equation. That was the part that unnerved him most. He couldn't solve her. He didn't even know where to start. In the early afternoon, Liam sat in the back of a lecture hall, barely listening, as the professor droned on about economic volatility. His mind drifted to things he normally avoided, the faint fear of becoming exactly like his father, the suffocating pressure of inheriting a billion-dollar empire, the constant surveillance of people who only saw him as a title and not a person. He worked tirelessly to look unfazed, to appear perfect, because he had been told perfection was the minimum acceptable standard for a Prescott. But sometimes he wondered what it would feel like to be human, to be messy, to be seen, to be loved without calculation, to choose something or someone without first measuring the risk. It was a foolish thought, and he pushed it away instantly. But the seed of it lingered planted the moment his eyes met hers. Later, after classes ended, Liam found himself outside without knowing why he'd walked there. He stood by the stone steps near the fountain, hands in his coat pockets, scanning the flow of students. And then he saw her. Ava was leaving the library, her bag slung over her shoulder, her hair now loosely tied and slightly frizzy from the wind. She didn't look like the other girls walking beside her, the ones complaining loudly about weekend plans and expensive brunches. Ava walked slightly apart from the cluster, not isolated by force, but by choice, as though she carried a small world inside her and didn't need to borrow anyone else's noise to feel full. Liam should have looked away, should have kept walking, should have ignored the strange pull tightening inside him. But he didn't. He stood there unmoving, watching her descend the steps. He wanted to observe without being caught, wanted to understand without being vulnerable. But then Ava's gaze flicked up almost by accident and collided with his. This time, there was no limousine, no crowd, no moment suspended in sunlight, just two people looking at each other in the late afternoon shade. Her eyes held no surprise, no intimidation, just a measured awareness that hit him harder than he expected. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't impressed. She wasn't curious. She was simply acknowledging him the way one acknowledges a stranger passing on the street. And for reasons he didn't want to examine, it bothered him. Liam inclined his head a fraction, a silent gesture, reflexive, polite. But Ava didn't return the nod. She broke eye contact first, her expression unreadable, and walked past him, as though he were just another face in the crowd. Something twisted inside Liam's chest, unfamiliar and unwelcome. Annoyance, intrigue, frustration that she didn't react to him the way everyone else did, or something deeper, something closer to the feeling he had locked away for years. He told himself it didn't matter, except it did, because in the next second, Daniel appeared again following Liam's line of sight, before whistling softly. "Wow, that's new," he murmured. "You watching someone who isn't watching you. That's a first. Drop it." Liam snapped sharper than intended. Daniel raised his hands. "Just saying, she's different." Liam walked away before the conversation could continue, but the words followed him anyway. She's different. He didn't want her to be different. He didn't want anything in his life to be different. Predictability kept him safe. Distance kept him sane. But Ava had already disrupted something inside him, something he had spent years building walls around. A small, rebellious tremor in his carefully controlled heart, the kind that didn't listen to logic or tradition, or the Prescott rulebook. As he reached the parking lot, Liam caught himself glancing over his shoulder one last time, searching for a figure he had no business remembering. She was gone. Only the wind moved through the courtyard now, bending the autumn leaves. Liam stood there for a long moment, gripping his keys tightly, a shiver of realization sliding through him like cold water down the spine. Something was happening to him, something he didn't choose, something he didn't want to name. Inside, a man raised to be cold, a heart he thought he had silenced, was beginning to stir quietly, rebelliously, dangerously. And deep down, under layers of denial and discipline, Liam felt a truth settle into his bones. Whatever this feeling was, whatever force had started to unravel him, it wasn't finished with him yet. A storm had begun, and for the first time in his carefully ordered life, Liam Prescott didn't know if he wanted shelter or if he wanted to walk straight into the rain. The assignment came from the academic board, delivered with the kind of polite firmness that allowed no room for negotiation. Ava Johnson would be the student tutor for Liam Prescott in their advanced finance course, an arrangement that seemed logical on paper, but felt like a disaster waiting to happen to both of them. Ava thought it was punishment disguised as privilege. Liam thought it was an irritation disguised as help. Neither wanted it, and neither was given a choice. When they met for the first session, in one of the quiet study lounges on the third floor of the library, a room with tall windows and afternoon light spilling across the long wooden tables, they exchanged the kind of stiff greetings that made it clear neither intended to make this easy. Ava sat down with the calm of someone resigned to surviving the hour, while Liam took his seat with a controlled nonchalance that didn't quite mask the edge in his posture. For the first 30 minutes, their interaction was nothing more than clipped explanations and dry academic terms, each of them hiding their mutual annoyance behind professionalism. Ava disliked the way he leaned back in his chair with an effortless confidence that bordered on arrogance, as though he already knew everything she said and simply tolerated her presence. And Liam disliked the way she refused to react to him at all, her tone, even her gaze cool, her instructions efficient. She didn't look impressed by him. She didn't look intimidated. She barely looked at him. And for reasons he didn't understand, that irritated him more than any direct insult could have. But life had a way of slipping moments into the cracks of routine moments no one planned for. It happened when they reached a section of the assignment Liam had misunderstood. He frowned at the page, brows drawing together slightly, and Ava without hesitation stood up and moved beside him to explain. It was the kind of thing tutors did every day, and yet something shifted in the air the instant she stepped close enough for Liam to catch the faint scent of her shampoo. Something clean, something warm, something maddeningly gentle. She leaned over the table, her hand resting on the margin of his notes, her voice low and focused. Her curls slid forward over her shoulder as she bent down to point at a line on his paper, and for a moment he forgot to breathe. Then it happened. Her hair brushed against his wrist, a feather-light graze, barely a whisper of contact. But it was enough to send a sudden electric jolt through him, sharp and startling, the kind of sensation that didn't come from touch alone, but from the person behind it. A shiver crossed his skin before he could stop it, and his chest tightened in a way that felt almost dangerous. Liam had been touched before, handshakes, greetings, flirtations he never encouraged, but nothing had ever clarified itself so quickly into need. Ava didn't seem to notice at first. She continued explaining the formula with calm precision, unaware that Liam's senses had collapsed into a single point of awareness: her proximity, the warmth of her, the quiet steadiness she carried like armor, the way she never tried to be impressive, and yet somehow was. He stared at the curve of her cheek, the concentration in her eyes, the faint tension in her jaw that suggested she had learned to be careful with every word she chose to speak. But then she felt it, the shift in the air, the heaviness of his stare. Her voice faltered for a second. She straightened slowly, her movement measured, as if giving herself time to decide whether what she sensed was real. When she turned to him, her eyes met his, and something unspoken crackled between them, sharp enough to pull the breath from both of them. Liam didn't look away. He couldn't. There was a quiet boldness in Ava's gaze, a challenge, even one that said she wasn't impressed by money or lineage or perfection, that she wasn't afraid of him in the way people usually were. Liam felt something unfamiliar loosen inside him, not softening exactly, but something close to surrendering to curiosity. His voice, when it came, was different from the one he used with everyone else, lower, quieter, tinged with something he didn't want examined. "You always avoid looking at me," he murmured, and the softness of the statement made Ava's stomach tighten. "As if you think I'm going to hurt you." Ava blinked once, surprised by the accuracy of the observation, surprised he had seen anything at all beneath the careful distance she kept. She took a breath, not stepping back, but grounding herself before responding. "I avoid people who might be trouble," she said evenly. "Not because I'm afraid of them, because I don't have time for the chaos they bring." Chaos. The word hit Liam harder than she intended. He let out a short, quiet laugh, not mocking, but almost disbelieving. Trouble, he repeated. That's the first time anyone's ever called me that to my face. Ava lifted a brow. I doubt it. Liam's mouth curved, not a full smile, but something smaller and infinitely more dangerous, the kind of expression that felt like it was carved out of the edge between arrogance and interest. You think I'm trouble, he said quietly, but I think you're fascinating. It wasn't a line. It wasn't flirtation. It was something else, something honest enough to unsettle her. Ava felt her pulse quicken despite herself. She forced her eyes away, gathering her notebook and stepping back from the table before the moment could deepen into something she wasn't ready to name. The assignment is finished, she said softly. We're done for today. She didn't wait for his answer. She walked toward the door with steady steps, her spine straight, her chin lifted, everything about her, trying to stay composed, even as her heart thudded against her ribs in confusion. She had expected him to be dismissive, arrogant, insufferably entitled, but not perceptive, not gently intense, not capable of looking at her like that, and certainly not capable of making her feel her own edges so clearly. She left the room quickly, needing distance, needing air. Liam didn't move for several seconds after she disappeared. He sat there, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the spot where she had been standing. The shift inside him was subtle but undeniable, like discovering a door in a house he had lived in his entire life. A door he never knew existed until she walked right through it. And now that he had glimpsed something beyond it, he couldn't unsee it, couldn't unfeel it. He told himself to get up, to leave, to stop thinking about the way her hair felt against his skin or how her voice dipped lower when she was concentrating. But his body didn't listen. His heart didn't listen. Something inside him had already crossed a threshold he couldn't retreat from. He stood slowly, running a hand through his hair, as if that could reset him. It didn't. The air still smelled faintly of her. The room felt marked by her presence, by the tension that had grown between them like an unseen thread. The more he tried to deny it, the more real it became. He didn't want to admit that he cared, but he did. Against logic, against upbringing, against every rule he'd built for himself. As he walked out into the hallway, he spotted her figure turning the corner, still wrapped in that effortless calm that contradicted everything she must have carried inside. And he realized in that moment, quietly, inevitably, that Ava had become something he couldn't ignore. She wasn't just an assignment or a fleeting distraction. She was an unraveling he never saw coming. And now that it had begun, he wasn't sure he wanted it to stop. He watched her disappear again, the echo of her steps fading, and something inside him whispered dangerously quietly that he had just taken the first step into a story whose ending he could no longer control. The touch had been accidental, but the feeling it left behind was anything but. Ava had learned early that growing up wasn't something that happened slowly with birthdays, candles, and gentle transitions. It happened in a single night, abrupt and merciless, when life ripped something from you so violently that the child inside you shattered, and the adult stepped into the wreckage without being asked. She didn't talk about the night the storm came, not to friends, not to professors, not even to herself, unless the memory cornered her. The sound of heavy rain had always stayed with her, the way it beat violently against the windows, while her father packed a suitcase in the dim hallway, refusing to look at her or her brother. She remembered the smell of whiskey on his shirt, the way her mother sobbed into her hands, and how the door closed behind him with a finality that changed the architecture of their home. She remembered the silence afterward, thick, terrifying, like the house itself had stopped breathing. And she remembered her brother Michael, who tried to smile at her, even as he broke beneath the weight of everything they'd lost. He was gone 3 weeks later, a boy who had loved music, who had played piano for her every night before bed, who had carried her on his shoulders through summer carnivals, the same boy who couldn't survive the emptiness their father left behind. The world called it a tragedy. Ava called it a betrayal that swallowed the sun. Her mother collapsed inward afterward, like a star imploding. Depression took her piece by piece, and vodka numbed the edges. Bills piled up on the counter. The refrigerator emptied, and Ava, still too young to know what responsibility truly meant, stepped forward because someone had to. There was no luxury of grieving slowly. Survival didn't wait. She took a job cleaning rooms in a downtown hotel. She lived on scholarships, loans, and the kind of exhaustion that burrowed into her bones. She became the one who paid rent, the one who calmed her mother through her worst nights, the one who kept their world from collapsing completely. She never called herself strong, just necessary. But strength is born from necessity more often than anyone admits. She carried that invisible weight everywhere. She didn't have the privilege of innocence anymore. When she walked across campus, she sometimes envied the carefree laughter around her, the students who had never experienced a night that could break them. Liam Prescott was one of them, at least on the surface. But surfaces were deceiving, and Ava, with her sharp intuition, sensed something in him that the others didn't. It wasn't pity, just understanding and awareness that the shadows under his eyes weren't born from sleepless parties or privileged problems. There was an ache behind his calm, an old bruise beneath the arrogance. She recognized it the way people recognize their own reflections. She didn't know the story. Not yet. But she knew the look. People who grew up in peace never carried that look. Liam's storms were different from hers, but storms didn't need to match to leave scars. His childhood wasn't marked by poverty or chaos. It was marked by coldness. The Prescott mansion was enormous, elegant, immaculate, and suffocating. A place where the ceilings were too high for comfort, and the rooms were arranged with such clinical perfection that even warmth felt like an intruder. His mother had been the only softness in the house, gentle, intuitive, the sort of woman who turned every corner into a home. She read to him, held him, quieted his fears. She protected him from the sharp edges of the Prescott legacy. And then she got sick. And then she was gone. And then the world shifted beneath his feet. He was too young to process it, too old to pretend he hadn't seen the truth. His father had mourned, but only in the way powerful men do, by burying his feelings beneath ambition and remarrying with impressive efficiency. Liam remembered the day a woman with perfectly curled hair and perfume like winter air moved into the house. She smiled too widely, hugged too tightly, and whispered things that made him shrink inside himself. Later, when the years carved her real nature cleanly into view, he understood she had never wanted to love him only to erase him. She made him feel like an inconvenience, an obstacle, a threat to her future as the new Mrs. Prescott. And she was careless with her cruelty. But the heaviest weight in his life was the accident, the one no one talked about, the one his father had pinned to him like a brand. The man who'd stepped into the road that night had lived, but Liam was told he hadn't, told it was Liam's fault, told that his recklessness had cost a life. That lie became a sentence he carried into adulthood. He punished himself before anyone else could. He avoided connections, real ones, because people shouldn't get close to someone who destroyed things. His exterior became cool, controlled, sometimes cold. It was easier than admitting how fragile he felt inside. The guilt lived in his marrow. Ava didn't know any of this, but something in him reminded her of a wounded animal, proud, distant, and desperate for someone not to flinch away. And something about her reminded him of light, but not the fragile kind, the kind that survives dark places. One evening during a thunderstorm that rumbled like old ghosts, They ended up crossing paths outside the library after their usual tutoring session. Ava was packing her books, hurrying to catch the last bus home, when lightning tore across the sky and she froze for one heartbeat, just enough for Liam to notice. It wasn't fear exactly, but memory. A memory she wished she could outrun. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her breath stilled almost imperceptibly, and something inside him expanded with a sudden, unexpected tenderness. He didn't reach out, didn't touch her. He simply stepped a little closer, his voice quiet, as if he knew anything louder would make her retreat. "Do storms bother you?" he asked. Ava shook her head, but not convincingly. "No. They just remind me of things I don't have time to think about." Liam's chest tightened, not because of her words, but the way she said them. Firm, steady, too matter-of-fact for someone her age. "You shouldn't have to deal with everything alone," he said, the admission slipping out before he could filter it. Ava met his eyes, then her expression unreadable. "Everyone does. Eventually." Her voice was soft, but her meaning was sharp enough to cut him. There, under the storm-lit sky, something in him cracked. Guilt, regret, loneliness, it all rose like a tide. He wanted to tell her more than he should, wanted to confess things he had never spoken aloud. Instead, he forced himself to swallow the words. Vulnerability didn't come easily. It felt like peeling skin from bone. But his silence didn't go unnoticed. Ava studied him with a new kind of attention, as if she recognized the struggle behind his composed mask. "You look like you're carrying something heavy," she said without accusation. "You look like you've been carrying it a long time." Liam's breath caught. Her intuition was unsettling, dangerous, beautiful. Maybe he murmured, "But some things aren't meant to be shared." Ava didn't push. She never pushed. She simply nodded, respecting boundaries, even when they protected wounds she didn't know existed. And that more than anything unsettled Liam. People always wanted something from him. Money, power, influence, acceptance. But Ava wanted nothing except distance, and paradoxically, that made him want to be close to her even more. But closeness wasn't simple. That night marked the first time Liam realized something frightening. Ava wasn't just a distraction. She was a mirror. She reflected his vulnerabilities back at him with terrifying clarity, and he didn't know whether to run from that or reach for it. For Ava, walking home through the rain, she found herself remembering things she had spent years suppressing. The way Michael's shoes still sat by the door long after he was gone. The way her mother stopped humming when she cooked. The way she herself had stopped allowing tears because crying felt pointless when there was work to do. She hated that Liam had seen even a flicker of that past in her eyes. She didn't want pity. She didn't want saving. She just wanted peace, even for a moment. But peace was a luxury, and she didn't live in that world. Still, as the thunder rolled across the sky, she couldn't stop thinking about the look on Liam's face. A look of haunted recognition, as if her pain echoed something inside him. She wondered what demons he carried, what lie he lived under, what wound turned a billionaire's son into a man who looked like he didn't believe he deserved softness. She didn't want to care, but she did, quietly, helplessly, against her better judgment. And Liam, back in his penthouse that night, stripped off his wet jacket and stared out at the storm with a heaviness that made his chest ache. His life had always felt like a performance, one he was expected to play flawlessly. But Ava made him feel unscripted, unprepared, real. And that terrified him more than anything his father or the Prescott legacy ever had. Their pasts were different, but their wounds recognized each other. And that recognition was the first step towards something. Neither of them was ready for something that felt dangerously close to healing. The hotel where Ava worked after her evening classes was not the kind of place students imagined when they dreamed of success. It was polished on the surface, glossy marble lobby, soft jazz humming through the air, but behind employee doors, it was a maze of chemical smells, water-stained ceilings, and the relentless grind that kept the luxury running. Ava didn't mind, or she told herself she didn't. Work was work. Bills didn't pay themselves. The future didn't build itself. But some nights felt harder than others, and this one was already wearing her thin. A guest had yelled at her for something she didn't do. Her mother had called minutes before her shift, slurring words in a way that always pierced through Ava, with guilt she didn't deserve. And the rain outside, soft but persistent, pressed on her chest, like an echo of all the storms she'd tried not to remember. By the time she pushed open the staff restroom door, tears were burning behind her eyes. She locked herself inside a stall and told herself she would breathe steady quiet, invisible the way she always did when life became too heavy. But strength has limits, and tonight hers snapped without warning. She covered her mouth with the back of her hand as sobs trembled through her, silent but violent, her other hand gripping the edge of the sink until her knuckles whitened. She hated crying at work, hated the vulnerability of it. But the room smelled of bleach, and she was alone, and sometimes solitude made grief braver. She splashed water onto her face, trying to erase the evidence, when the door creaked open. She didn't turn. She didn't want anyone to see her like this. She kept her head low, fingers shaking as she wiped her cheeks. The person behind her didn't speak, didn't leave. Just stood there silent, in a way that made the air heavier. She squeezed her eyes shut, hoping whoever it was would mistake her for someone else. But then she heard his breath, steady, familiar enough to stop her own. Liam. He hadn't meant to find her. He'd come to the hotel looking for something to distract him from the weight of his own thoughts. Maybe a workout in the private gym, maybe a drink. He wouldn't finish anything to drown the restlessness stirring since the storm the night before. He didn't expect to see Ava rushing through the service hallway with her head down and shoulders trembling. He followed instinct before logic, feet moving after her into the restroom doorway. And when he saw her reflection in the mirror, eyes, red, hands, shaky, a vulnerability so raw it nearly broke something inside him, he froze. Ava was not supposed to look like that. Not in his mind. She was strength poised, contained fire. He had imagined her as a fortress no one could breach. But seeing her cracked open like this felt like witnessing something sacred and painful all at once. A version of her she clearly never meant anyone to see. He took a hesitant step toward her, the sound of his shoes soft against the tile. "Ava," he said, barely above a whisper. She startled, spinning around as his hand brushed her shoulder. Not hard, not demanding, just a touch, born out of instinct. But it shocked her anyway. Her eyes flashed with something sharp and wounded, and she stepped back so quickly the stall door rattled. "Don't." Her voice trembled, steadied, sharpened. "Don't touch me, if you're not certain you want to know who I really am." The words hung heavy between them. She wasn't accusing him of hurting her. She was warning him that she wasn't simple, that she wasn't soft, that she came with history and cracks that couldn't be smoothed by charm or money. Warning him that her world wasn't pretty or polished or safe, and that stepping toward her meant stepping toward all the shadows she carried. Liam's breath caught, not from offense, but from something dangerously close to reverence. He lowered his hands slowly, palms open at his sides as if surrendering. He had never seen her eyes blaze like this, vulnerable and fierce at once. "I didn't come here to hurt you," he said quietly. Her chin lifted. "People don't mean to hurt others. They just do." That hit him harder than she knew. For a moment, he forgot the restroom, forgot the fluorescent lighting, forgot the hum of pipes inside the walls. All he saw was her ashamed of crying, angry at herself, angry at him for seeing what she tried so hard to hide. "Ava," he said again, softer now. "I'm not trying to take anything from you." She shook her head, wiping her cheeks with her sleeve, trying to rebuild her armor, even as fresh tears glimmered. "You don't even know what anything means to me." Liam hesitated. Silence pressed around them, thick and strangely intimate. His heart hammered in his chest, not with desire, but with the terror of saying something true. He wasn't used to truth, not the emotional kind. But tonight he couldn't pretend. Not when she looked like she was holding herself together by threads. "I want to understand you," he said, and for once there was no edge, no coolness, no practiced calm, just sincerity. "I want to know who you are. All of it." Ava laughed, once humorless and small. "People say that until they see the parts that aren't convenient." Maybe Liam murmured. "But you're different." She stiffened. "Don't romanticize me." "I'm not." His voice deepened, quiet, but unwavering. "I'm telling you the truth. You scare me not because of what you are, but because of what you make me want." Her eyes flickered, a subtle tremor in her breath, betraying the impact of his words. "And what is that, Liam?" He swallowed. "More." The single word seemed to echo in the cramped room. More honesty, more connection, more of her. And that admission terrified him, because wanting more meant wanting something real, something he couldn't control, predict, or buy, something that could break him. Ava turned away, gripping the sink again, as though needing something solid to hold on to. Her voice was barely audible. "I'm not something you can own." His chest tightened. "I know." He stepped closer, not touching her, just close enough for her to feel his presence warm and steady behind her. "I don't want to own you. I want to understand you. But I'm afraid that once I start, I won't be able to stop." Her shoulders rose and fell with a shallow breath. Slowly she lifted her head to meet his reflection in the mirror. There was a vulnerability there she didn't hide this time, a softness she rarely let slip. "Liam," she whispered, "I'm not looking for someone to save me. I just want to be respected, seen, not pitied." Something inside him pulled tight. "I don't pity you," he said. "I respect you more than anyone in my world." He didn't know he meant it until the words left his mouth. But he did. She earned respect without demanding it, without trying, without even wanting it. Ava blinked, another tear slipping down her cheek. She wiped it away slower this time, as though tired of hiding everything. "I stay," she said softly, "if I'm valued. Not used, not collected, not added to a list of things that fit into someone's perfect life." He exhaled a long, shaky breath that surprised him. "Then stay," he murmured, "because you don't fit into anything I understand." Her lips parted just slightly, a mix of confusion and something warmer. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Something in the air shifted the distance between them, no longer sharp, but fragile, uncertain, alive. For the first time in his life, Liam felt the weight of wanting something he couldn't command. The desire wasn't physical. It was deeper. A yearning for closeness, truth, rawness. Something money couldn't touch. Something he'd spent years avoiding, because it meant opening doors he'd sealed shut long ago. He watched her in the dim mirror, her reflection trembling with exhaustion and emotion. And he realized with a clarity that unsettled him that he didn't simply want to comfort her. He wanted to know her, every part she hid, every fear she buried, every truth she locked behind silence. Ava finally took a breath steady enough to stand on. "I need to finish my shift," she whispered gently, pulling herself back together. "I can't fall apart here." Liam nodded, though part of him ached to stop her to offer something he wasn't ready to name. If you ever need. She cut him off, but her tone had softened. I don't need rescuing. She paused, hesitant. But thank you for being here tonight. It was the smallest concession, but it felt monumental. He stepped aside as she walked toward the door, her movements slow, fragile, but upright. She didn't look back, but he did. He watched until the door closed, a hollow ache settling in his chest, where certainty used to be. And then he whispered into the empty room, almost to himself, I'm certain now. But Ava didn't hear him. Not yet. And that uncertainty, hers not his, was the new storm forming on the horizon of both their lives. It began with whispers. They always do. At first, they were small enough for Ava to ignore strained smiles from classmates, hushed comments behind her back, glances that lingered too long to be accidental, the kind of quiet cruelty she had grown used to navigating. But this time the whispers grew teeth. A rumor spread that Ava had manipulated her way into tutoring Liam for attention and status. Then that she had been seen leaving his penthouse, a lie, a deliberate fabrication whispered by Becca Kingsley, the girl who had adored Liam since they were children. The kind of dangerous affection built on entitlement rather than love. Becca had watched Liam's gaze drift toward someone else and refused to let the shift happen quietly. She planted stories, staged photographs, and wore innocence like a scented scarf. And just when the rumor fire was beginning to die, Liam's stepmother poured gasoline on it. Because for her, Ava was not just a girl near Liam. She was a threat to the perfectly curated image she wanted for the Prescott family. A narrative began to circulate Ava. The scholarship girl from nowhere was only after the Prescott fortune. Someone leaked her address. Someone called her mother unstable. Someone sent reporters to her workplace. She didn't know which cruelty belonged to Becca and which belonged to the Prescott matriarch, and in truth, it didn't matter. All Ava knew was that her private world had been dragged into the glare of strangers who judged without understanding. The breaking point came one afternoon when she walked out of class and saw her name splashed across an online news article, scholarship student accused of manipulating heir Liam Prescott. The words struck her like a physical blow. She felt her chest seize her breath, choke at the back of her throat. She clicked the article only once, just long enough to see photos of her working at the hotel headlines, implying gold-digging comments, dissecting her worth as though she were a commodity. She dropped her phone, unable to look at a world that insisted on viewing her through a distorted lens. The worst part wasn't the article itself. It was the realization that someone had gone out of their way to destroy her. Someone who knew exactly where to stab. Someone close to Liam. By the time Liam found her outside the east gate of campus, the sky was already split with dark clouds, the kind that carried the kind of rain New York reserved for nights when the city felt its sharpest edges. Ava stood there trembling, not from cold, but from the kind of humiliation that clung to a person's skin, like soot. When she heard her name called, she didn't turn. She couldn't bear for him to see her like that again. Ava Liam's voice approached urgent, breathless, painfully human. She inhaled slowly, trying to steady herself, but the storm inside her was louder than the one gathering above. She turned only when she felt him close behind her. The moment their eyes met, something inside her splintered. "Don't," she whispered, her voice cracking in a way she couldn't hide. "Please don't say anything, Ava." "No." She shook her head, tears warming the corners of her eyes. "You belong to a world I can't survive in." The first drop of rain hit the pavement between them. A second slid down her cheek. Rain or tear, she didn't know anymore. Liam's face shifted, a mix of confusion and fear. "What are you talking about?" She laughed, a broken sound. "Your family hates me. Your friends hate me. I'm all over the news like I'm some scandal waiting to happen. And you, her voice choked. You're Liam Prescott. Everything about your life screams that I don't belong in it. She stepped back as if distance could soften the blow. I can't do this, Liam. I can't keep pretending I'm strong enough to stand beside someone who lives under a microscope. The rain accelerated droplets, turning into sheets of cold silver. Ava turned away, her feet already carrying her across the street, the only thing she could think about being escape. But Liam moved faster. He grabbed her wrist, not harshly, but with a grip so desperate she felt the tremor in his hand. Ava, stop. She struggled for a moment more with herself than with him, but his voice cracked in a way that froze her. When she turned back, she saw his eyes, not the controlled, polished gaze of the Prescott heir, but something raw and trembling. Something she didn't think he ever showed to anyone. Ava, he breathed. Please don't go. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know anything about love. But I know what it feels like when something matters, and losing you already hurts more than anything I've ever felt. A gust of wind whipped rain across their faces. Ava blinked through it, heart pounding. I'm scared, she whispered, the words ripped from someplace deep, someplace she rarely opened. I'm scared whatever this is, will break me. Liam stepped closer, rain darkening his hair, slipping down his jaw, soaking into the collar of his coat. He lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His palm cupped her cheek, thumb brushing a tear or maybe raindrop off her skin. Then, let me be the one who breaks first, he said softly. Let me fall, Ava. I'm already falling anyway. Something in her chest cracked open. Fear, longing, disbelief, all tangled into a single unbearable thread. She stared at him, searching for a lie and finding none. The storm around them roared, thunder shuddering across the sky, rain pouring harder until the world blurred into streaks of silver. Her breath trembled, barely a whisper. Liam. He leaned in slowly, reverently, as if giving her every chance to refuse. And she almost did, almost stepped back, almost closed the door to the thing that terrified her most. But then his forehead rested gently against hers, and the trembling in her body eased, replaced by something warmer, deeper, unstoppable. Her fingers curled around the collar of his drenched coat, pulling him closer without meaning to. He exhaled sharply at the touch, a sound that vibrated through both of them. And then, with rain falling like a curtain around them, she let herself fall too. Their lips met, not in hunger, not in possession, but in something slow and devastatingly tender. The kiss wasn't practiced or polished. It shook with the weight of everything they feared and everything they wanted. Rain streamed down their faces, blended with warmth, slipped between their mouths, like the sky blessing their recklessness. Liam deepened the kiss gently, his hand sliding behind her neck, holding her as though she were the first real thing he'd ever touched. Ava melted against him, her body trembling from emotion rather than cold. She tasted rain salt, and something unmistakably him, something steady, something waiting, something she hadn't realized she'd been craving. The kiss felt like shelter in the middle of their storms, like breath after drowning, like two people who had been walking through their own darkness finally finding a piece of light that didn't burn. When they finally broke apart, their foreheads stayed together, breath tangled between them, rain dripping down like melted stardust. Liam's voice was barely audible. You're the first thing that's ever felt real to me. Ava closed her eyes, the confession settling deep. And you're the first person who made me want to stay. But the rain didn't wash away their problems. It didn't erase the rumors or the pain waiting for both of them. Their kiss wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a beginning, soaked in risk. When she stepped back, he caught her hand again gently this time, as though afraid she'd disappear into the night. "Ava," he said, voice steadier now. "I'll fight whatever this world throws at us. Just don't walk away before I even get the chance." Her fingers squeezed his without thinking. "I'm not leaving," she whispered. "Not tonight." Lights from passing cars reflected on the wet pavement, painting their silhouettes in streaks of gold and blue. For a moment, New York felt quieter, as though the storm had bowed its head to let them breathe. They stood there in the cold rain, two damaged souls wrapped in something fragile and new, something that felt suspiciously like hope. And for the first time, neither of them ran. The Prescott estate sat just outside Manhattan, a monument of old money and legacy, the kind of place built not for comfort, but for declaration. Tall stone archways guarded the entrance, ivy clung loyally to the walls, and the interior smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive history. Ava had only been inside once before, briefly and reluctantly, but today she was there by invitation, not from Liam, not from his father, but from the matriarch herself, Eleanor Prescott, Liam's grandmother, the woman who, as rumor whispered, could make or break anyone in their orbit with a single sentence. Ava had prepared herself for scrutiny, for judgment, for being silently measured and found inadequate. She walked through the corridors with her heart tense, her palms cold, her breath tight in her chest. She expected disdain. She expected intimidation. She even expected hostility. What she didn't expect was silence, the kind that felt too observant to be comfortable. Eleanor Prescott sat waiting for her in a sunroom overlooking the garden, a teacup between her fingers, and a posture so precise she could have been carved from marble. Her hair silver and immaculate framed a face lined not with age but with stories. She looked powerful, but not in a way that needed proving. Power lived in her eyes. Ava approached, hands clasped to hide any trembling. Eleanor didn't speak immediately. She simply watched Ava with a stillness so profound, it felt like being read page by page. The sunlight illuminated every detail, the steadiness in Ava's shoulders, the fear she tried to disguise, the exhaustion she'd worn for months without rest. And beneath all of that, something truer, an unbroken thread of resilience. When Eleanor finally spoke, her voice was calm, low, and unsettling in its softness. "Sit, child." Ava obeyed. She folded herself into the chair across from the older woman's spine-straight gaze, respectful, but not submissive. Eleanor noticed that, and she approved. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. The rain from the night before had left the garden damp, and small birds hopped between branches outside, shaking droplets from their feathers. The world felt unusually quiet. Eleanor studied the girl across from her, not her clothes, not her background, but the way she held her pain, as though she had learned long ago not to hand it to anyone else. "You have the eyes," the old woman said at last, "of someone who has known too much hurt for her age." Ava's breath caught. She was used to hiding behind competence and silence. She wasn't used to being seen through. Eleanor continued, her gaze steady, unblinking. "And yet, there is still warmth in you, a heart that wants to love despite the cost." She leaned back slightly, fingers tapping the porcelain of her teacup. "Liam needs someone like that, more than he will ever admit." The words hit Ava with the force of something both comforting and frightening. She lowered her gaze, unsure of what to say. Praise from a Prescott wasn't something she expected, especially not praise that felt so deeply personal. It made her chest tighten, her throat sting. Eleanor's voice softened, the edges smoothing like velvet. "Look at me, Ava." Ava lifted her eyes. I do not care about your money. I do not care where you come from. What I care about is whether you see my grandson, not the name, not the fortune, not the legacy, but the boy who has been lost for far too long." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. "And I believe you do." Ava swallowed hard. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible. I'm trying, but I don't know if I'm strong enough for everything that comes with him." "No one is strong enough," Eleanor said simply. "Not at first. Love demands strength you haven't discovered yet, and pain will force you to find it." She set her cup down. "The question is whether you are willing to grow that strength for him." Ava looked out at the garden, watching the sunlight catch on the wet leaves. She thought of Liam's kiss in the rain, the tremble in his voice, the way he confessed fear, the way other men confessed pride. She thought of the rumors, the attacks, the cold stares, the humiliation things she had endured because he mattered. And she realized something quietly terrifying. She had already begun to grow that strength. She just hadn't noticed. "I don't want to lose myself," she admitted, turning back to Eleanor. The older woman nodded. "Good. A woman who fears losing herself is far more capable of keeping herself." Her expression warmed with a kind of fondness Ava hadn't expected. "If you love him, do it fiercely. If it becomes too heavy, come to me." Ava blinked, startled. "Come to you?" "Yes, child. I am old, not heartless. I have lived long enough to know when a storm is worth weathering. And Liam—" Her voice cracked, almost imperceptibly softened by memory. "Liam has been weathering storms alone for far too long." Something in Ava's chest trembled, not with fear, but with recognition. She had always fought alone, always held the world on her shoulders because no one else would. But hearing Eleanor offer support, real, maternal, unconditional, felt like a door opening into a room Ava had never been allowed to enter. Safety, belonging. She hadn't realized until now how deeply she craved both. "Thank you," Ava whispered, her voice thick. I didn't think anyone in this family would ever say that to me." Eleanor's eyes twinkled with a humor that didn't quite hide the steel beneath. "My dear, the rest of this family is full of fools. They see only the surface and judge what they fear." She leaned forward slightly. "I was not the one who raised fools. I was the one who built this dynasty. And I see deeper." Ava's lips parted, a shaky breath slipping out. Her eyes stung a mix of relief and grief she hadn't expected to feel in this house. "I'm not used to being seen," she admitted, voice trembling. "Not like this. Not past the surface. You have spent so long being strong that you have forgotten what it feels like to be recognized," Eleanor said gently. "To be valued." Silence wrapped around them again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was warm, fragile, full of something almost sacred. When Eleanor reached across the table and took Ava's hand, Ava didn't pull away. The older woman's grip was steady and warm, her thumb brushing comfort into the back of Ava's palm with a tenderness that surprised them both. "You are not alone now, child," Eleanor murmured. "And if anyone tries to hurt you again, family or otherwise, they will answer to me first." A small, startled laugh slipped from Ava's lips, wet with emotion. Eleanor squeezed her hand once more before releasing it. "Now," she said with the calm certainty of someone who had commanded empires, "go find Liam. He is more frightened than you are." Ava stood slowly, still, overwhelmed, still unsteady, but lighter somehow, like a weight she had carried, unknowingly had been lifted from her shoulders. When she turned to leave, Eleanor called after her, "And Ava." She looked back. "He has inherited many things," Eleanor said softly, "but the one thing he never learned is how to let someone in. If you can teach him that, you will heal more than you know." Ava nodded, her throat too tight for words. She stepped out of the sunroom, down the immaculate hallway, past portraits of powerful Prescotts who had come before. But for the first time, she didn't feel small in their presence. She felt chosen. And Liam, waiting in another room with a storm behind his eyes, had no idea that the most powerful woman in his family had just handed Ava something priceless, not approval, but belonging. New York had a particular kind of glow at night, an expanse of light that made the sky look alive, as if the city itself had a heartbeat. On the rooftop of Prescott Hotel, that glow stretched endlessly, wrapping the skyline in shimmering gold and silver. Jazz music drifted through the air like warm breath, soft enough not to intrude, strong enough to steady even the most fragile nerves. White balloons floated gently in the breeze, anchored by thin ribbons that shimmered under string lights. It wasn't extravagant, not by Prescott standards. It was intimate, intentional. A kind of quiet magic Liam had never cared to create for anyone before. But for Ava, he had not only created it, he'd spent weeks imagining how to make it perfect. He stood near the railing, hands inside his pockets, to hide how badly they trembled. It was almost absurd to think that a man who sat in billion-dollar boardrooms without flinching, who negotiated deals that made other executives sweat, now found his palms sweating over a woman, one woman who had no interest in his power, his money, or his name. But that was exactly why he trembled, because with Ava, he was not Prescott's heir. He was just Liam, a man who could lose something irreplaceable if he wasn't careful. Ava stepped onto the rooftop moments later, her breath catching subtly at the sight. She wasn't someone who needed grandeur, but she appreciated intention, and this space with its warmth and softness felt like he had pulled the city closer just so she wouldn't feel small in it. She walked toward him slowly, her heart already thudding at the familiarity of his silhouette. When she reached him, Liam turned, and the look in his eyes nearly stole the breath from her lungs. There was no hesitation in them, no doubt. Only a man standing at the edge of something terrifyingly beautiful. He reached out for her hand, and for the first time in his life, Liam Prescott's fingers trembled when they touched another's. Ava felt the tremor and looked up surprised. This man was steel in every room he entered. To see him tremble now was an intimacy she hadn't known she needed. He took one breath, slow, steadying before he spoke. Ava Johnson. He began, her full name falling from his lips like a vow. I'm not going to pretend I can promise you a simple future. I can't tell you things will always be fair or quiet or painless. His thumb brushed her knuckles, a soft movement that felt more vulnerable than anything else he'd ever done. But I can promise you this. Whatever path you choose, bright, dark, uncertain, terrifying, I want to walk it with you. His voice dropped lower, steadier, as if the truth came easier once released. You don't have to love me perfectly. Love me the way you know how, the way life has taught you. And I'll love you with everything I am and everything I'm learning to be. Ava felt something shift inside her. Not excitement, not shock. Something deeper, quieter, like the first warm breeze after a long winter. She looked at him. Not the polished exterior, not the powerful gaze that commanded rooms, but the man who had stood in the rain, confessing his fear, who had chased her through chaos, who now held her hand as if it grounded him. Her voice softened, trembling with honesty she'd never allowed herself before. I won't lie to you, she whispered. I still get scared. I don't know how to unlearn all the ways life has taught me to run when things get close. She took a breath, steady but fragile. But I'm done forcing myself to walk away from something that feels real. So, no, I can't promise I won't be scared. Her fingers tightened around his. "But I can promise I won't run anymore." Those words hit him harder than any declaration of love, because Ava was not someone who gave promises lightly. Her promises were forged from survival, from loss, from the weight of everything she'd endured, and giving this promise to him meant she was trusting him with the most fragile part of herself, her future. Liam stepped closer, lifting her chin gently with his hand. The city lights reflected in her eyes, making them shimmer like galaxies. His breath mingled with hers, warm despite the cool night air. When he leaned in, the world seemed to hush around them. The jazz softened. The wind slowed. The rooftop became a suspended moment. His lips met hers in a kiss that wasn't urgent or devouring. It was profound, patient, deep. The kind of kiss that built bridges instead of burning them. Ava felt herself melt into him, her walls softening without breaking her fear, quieting as his hand slid behind her waist, holding her steady. It wasn't a kiss of possession. It was an invitation, a slow, deliberate promise. Liam kissed her like she was the only truth he had ever been certain of, and Ava kissed him back like she was finally choosing something for herself rather than for survival. When they broke apart, their foreheads remained pressed together, breaths tangled in the space between them. Liam closed his eyes, savoring the closeness. Ava lifted her hand to his jaw, tracing the line of it, with a softness that made him exhale shakily. She whispered, "This feels like stepping into a world I didn't think I was allowed to enter." Liam opened his eyes, gaze tender. "Then let me hold the door. And if it gets heavy, I'll carry it with you." Ava let out a quiet, emotional laugh, the kind caught between disbelief and relief. She leaned into his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, in a way that felt instinctual, protective grounding. They stood there like that, bodies warm against the cool night air, the city stretching beneath them like a witness, not a judge. And in that embrace, the labels that once divided them dissolved. There was no wealth or poverty, no legacy or hardship, no color or class, just two people who had known pain, who had survived storms, who had found each other in the quiet aftermath. Ava felt his heartbeat under her cheek, steady, strong, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was standing alone. Liam held her as if holding both of them together. Ava closed her eyes, knowing that while this didn't erase their battles, it made them easier to face. They stayed like that, swaying gently to the distant jazz, her breath sinking with his hands tracing calming circles against her back. And when Ava finally murmured, "Liam, I think this is the first time in my life I've felt chosen," he tightened his arms around her. "You weren't chosen," he whispered against her hair. "You were wanted." The rooftop lights flickered softly. The wind carried the scent of rain left over from the night before. The world below moved on, unaware of the quiet revolution unfolding above. But on this roof, everything changed. Liam Prescott, the man raised behind walls of expectation, learned what it felt like to let someone in without losing himself. Ava Johnson, the girl who built armor from pain, learned what it felt like to let someone hold her without breaking her. And together, in that suspended moment, they loved each other. Not like a fairy tale, not like a whirlwind, but like grown people. Love honestly, fearfully, fiercely, with the courage to stay, even when leaving once felt easier. For once, the night didn't feel cold. For once, the future didn't feel frightening. And for the first time in their fractured lives, they weren't standing alone.